Dear Muse, I've been given great advice from other writers. It sounds like good advice. I believe it could help me, but I can't seem to do it. Why can't I take any advice? One of the most frustrating things about being a human is this. You can understand something and still not be emotionally ready to do it. But before we move any further, let's take a deep breath. Unclench your jaw, roll your shoulders, let them drop, and let's get right into it. Knowing something doesn't mean you're ready to try it. There is an assumption that just because the advice makes sense, your body and your subconscious should be ready to follow it. But growth doesn't work that way. You know, messy drafts are part of the process, and you can still feel the need to write perfectly. You can know rest is important and still feel guilty when you don't write. You can know feedback isn't personal and still feel hurt when you receive it. That doesn't mean the advice is wrong. It means you received it before you were emotionally ready to accept it. And as a writer, it's important to be aware of that distinction, because it can deeply affect the way you experience your writing journey. Here's the part that doesn't get talked about enough. Writing advice can feel validating because a lot of them skips the emotional context. Like, just be okay to write a messy draft. Don't overthink it, just write. You can't edit a blank page. And even though it's well-intended, these advice can work for some people, but for others, it feels like your writing struggle is unnecessary. If it's easy for others, maybe you're the one that's making writing harder than it actually needs to be. And when you're already carrying that guilt, the pressure, or the fear, then that kind of writing advice doesn't feel supportive. It feels dismissive. It's not that you don't want to improve your writing, it's that you don't want to be told your struggle to write doesn't make sense. Writing advice that jumps straight to the solution tends to overstep some of the most deeply human things, like the fact that you're still hurting. There's a critical voice in your head, one that I like to call the villain of your writing journey. And it lives in the deepest part of that wound. Because you care so much about your stories and bringing these stories to life, your villain will say whatever it needs to say to keep you safe from that pain, even if it means keeping you stuck in that mud, because your villain believes fulfilling your dreams will cause you the greatest pain of all. Writing advice can be hard to take. It may even cause some anger or resentment towards the person giving the advice because it pokes an old wound. If you grew up needing to get things done right the first time, if mistakes came with consequences, if being corrected felt like being judged, then some writing advice can feel like exposure, like someone is pointing directly at an insecurity that once made you feel deeply vulnerable, something that you had to learn to protect. So when someone says, "Oh, well, just write," your nervous system kicks in because you feel you are in danger of receiving the same pain you did the last time you felt this vulnerability. The resistance you feel, even when you agree with the writing advice, is your body protecting you. That resistance isn't failure, it's self-preservation. Here is something that is rarely said out loud. The word advice can be a trigger. Advice isn't just information. It can be viewed as an emotional request to change before you feel safe doing so. It's asking you to trust the process that once caused you pain or that we're taught would cause pain. It's asking you to risk being wrong. It's asking you to loosen control over something you held so tightly for a reason. So if writing advice feels hard to take, that's okay. It doesn't mean you're resistant. It means it's asking for an emotional movement you're not ready for yet. For me, I quit writing 15 years ago. I lost faith in my writing journey. And since then, I was given so much advice, encouragement, supportment, any attempts to pull me back into writing. But every time I considered writing again, I asked the same questions. How did you get past writer's block? How did you write past the first sentence? And how did you keep going when errors slowed you down? And I kept getting the same answer. Just write. Eventually, I was so frustrated that I broke down in front of my sister. I told her how much I missed writing like it did when I was a kid because I didn't have this struggle before. And she reminded me of something important. She reminded me how much pressure we grew up with, the fear we had if we didn't do it perfectly, and how it followed us into adulthood. It would have been easy to blame everyone involved in creating that villain in my head, but blame wasn't going to help me write. If I wanted to write again, I had to work on tearing down that writer's block because it wasn't creativity. It wasn't creativity that was stopping me. It was my emotional wounds. And while the advice, just write, was good advice, it took me years to understand what it really meant. It lacked context. The steps to go from struggling to write to just write. And I learned it wasn't about forcing words onto the page. It was about using writing as a way to move through my insecurities, like journaling, exploring characters with fears, trying new writing styles, and discovering who I was as a writer. Writing itself, it can be healing, but only if you're willing to be vulnerable with yourself, to look at those emotional wounds and learn how to work with them instead of being controlled by them. Advice is not a verdict that you are doing something wrong as a writer. And struggling to follow advice doesn't mean you're failing. Think of advice like an invitation, one where you're allowed to accept it, arrive late, or decline altogether. Maybe you're overwhelmed. Maybe life is heavy, or maybe you're giving yourself the space to sit with your insecurities and have a safe and honest conversation with that villain and gently tell it, I understand why you exist, but I get to decide my fate. That doesn't mean you're resisting growth. It means you are pacing your writing and your writing journey in a way that's most suitable to you. So next time advice feels hard to hear, ask yourself this. Is this advice meant for me, for the version that I am today, or for the future version of me? A great example of this is the advice of self-publishing versus traditional publishing. At the beginning of my writing journey, I was given a lot of advice about which path to choose. And honestly, it was overwhelming, especially for someone who was still struggling to write the very first sentence of her very first draft. It just added another layer to my struggle. At the time, I thought I needed to have that path figured out, but I didn't. What I actually needed was to learn how to move past my struggles with writing, and not how to write, not character development, not how to even write a messy first draft, and definitely not which publishing route to take. I had to learn who I was as a writer. And not all advice is wrong, but not all of them are well-timed. So if you ever feel overwhelmed with writing or with writing advice, here are a few grounding reminders you can use. Tell yourself, I understand this advice. I'm not ready to use it yet. I can revisit this advice when I feel it will support me. I don't need to force my writing growth for someone else's comfort. And if you like journaling, and I hope you do, here's your reflection question for the week. What advice keeps repeating itself, and what do I need before I feel ready to try it? Don't judge the answer, just notice it. If you're struggling to take writing advice, even good advice, it doesn't mean you're failing. It doesn't mean someone else knows you better than you know yourself. And it certainly doesn't mean you're doing your writing journey wrong. Every writer's journey is different. Not all advice will apply to you or even work for you. You are in control of your own growth. You get to discover who you are as a writer, and you are allowed and encouraged to experiment with your stories. That's what writing journey is all about. You're doing better than you think. And we're going to take this one breath, one word, and one draft at a time. This was Dear Muse. And if you're struggling to write, leave a comment with the hashtag Dear Muse, and maybe your question will be in a future episode. Or, buy a new notebook.